Have you ever wondered what it would be like
Ah,
to live in a world where the government controls, like, everything,
yeah,
every single aspect of your life? It's kind of a chilling thought, isn't it?
it is. It is.
That's what we're going to be looking at today in this deep dive,
Yeah.
the world of totalitarianism.
Yeah.
We're going to unpack its philosophical roots,
Right.
look at how it actually works, and the consequences.
Yeah.
Pretty heavy stuff.
Heavy stuff. Yeah.
I'm joined by, well, our expert.
Yeah.
You've been on the show before.
Thank you for having me.
So before we dive into the dark heart of this topic, let's just get like a working definition.
Sure.
What exactly is it that makes a government totalitarian?
Yeah. That's a great place to start. I mean, I think
Yeah.
most people, when they hear the term totalitarianism, they think strict government,
Right.
authoritarian government. It's way more than that, though, right?
Yeah. Totalitarianism is about controlling every aspect of life, public and private. It's not just about your actions. It's about controlling your thoughts, your beliefs.
So it's like they get inside your head
It's
to take
think.
what you, thought control, belief control,
Even your emotions.
all of that.
Wow.
To really understand how these systems come to be, I think we need to look at the ideologies that fuel them.
Yeah.
I think two of the most prominent ones, and the ones we'll focus on today, are Marxism-Leninism
Okay.
and fascism.
Marxism-Leninism. I mean, I've heard that term before.
Of course.
It's connected to Karl Marx, right?
Karl Marx, yes. He had this idea about a classless society.
Right, right.
No more workers being exploited by, the capitalist system.
Mhm.
He called the workers the proletariat, by the way,
Right.
just for reference.
So this was supposed to be like a worker's paradise
Yeah, it was supposed to be a
Fascinating.
utopia.
where nobody's exploited, no inequality. You can see how that would sound really appealing to a lot of people.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely.
Especially, I mean, back in back in the day, and Marx was writing.
But how did this ideal, this sort of utopian vision, how did that transform into these totalitarian regimes that we've seen in history?
Yeah.
Where does Lenin fit into all of this?
Well, Lenin, he took Marx's ideas
Hmm.
and kind of adapted them for his own revolutionary purposes.
Yeah.
So he believed that you needed this vanguard party. It was basically like this highly disciplined group
Okay.
that would lead the revolution.
So this idea that was supposed to empower the working class, it ends up being used to justify a small group
Exactly.
seizing power.
That's the irony of it. You start with this idea of, no inequality,
Right.
no exploitation.
And it ends up
being a very small group of people that holds all the power.
Right.
And everyone else has nothing.
Yeah. So it's like the opposite of
It is
what Marx was
a
envisioning.
complete perversion of the original idea. And this is where things take a dark turn, right?
Oh.
I mean, you look at the Soviet Union under Stalin, and it's a perfect example of how this can go wrong. He took this concept of the vanguard party, this elite group,
Right.
and just transformed it into this brutal dictatorship.
And that brings us to, I think, one of the most horrific examples of this ideology in action, and that's the Holodomor.
Oh, absolutely.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, so the Holodomor was a man-made famine
Right.
in Ukraine engineered by Stalin's regime.
Okay.
And it led to the deaths of millions of people. It's really hard to even fathom the scale of the suffering.
Yeah.
And what makes it even more horrific
Yeah.
is that it was entirely preventable.
I know we've touched on propaganda before. How did propaganda play into this tragedy?
Well, propaganda played a huge role in concealing the famine from the outside world.
Okay.
The Soviet government, they were very good at controlling the narrative.
Right.
They wanted to portray this collectivization of farms, which was actually a key factor in the famine, as this great success story.
So while millions were starving, the government
Yeah.
was busy
Exactly.
spinning this.
Spinning, manipulating
Yeah.
narrative. Wow.
It's a It's a chilling example of
Yeah.
how these regimes use propaganda to hide their crimes.
It's really disturbing to think about.
It is.
So it's a pretty stark reminder of how these utopian ideals
Right.
can go horribly wrong.
Yeah, they get twisted,
Yeah.
distorted, and ultimately weaponized by those in power.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a little bit about Marxism-Leninism. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about fascism.
Okay.
Fascism is often associated with nationalism, this extreme nationalism.
Yeah, that's one of the key components, but it's not the whole story. I
Okay.
think fascism is a lot more complex than that.
I mean, it's an ideology that basically puts the state above everything else, above individuals, above everything.
Right.
And it really emphasizes things like authoritarian leadership, militarism, and it completely suppresses individual rights.
All in the name of this.
All in the name of national unity,
National unity.
national strength, that sort of thing.
Okay.
But the thing is, it often leads to, violence and oppression.
And of course, one of the most, I guess, well-known, but also one of the most chilling examples of fascism in action is, of course, Nazi Germany under Hitler.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, he really, I guess, took fascism to its logical extreme.
It's a stark warning of what can happen when this ideology is taken to its extreme.
And it led to, I mean, the Holocaust, which was the genocide of 6 million Jews. And then, of course, the aggressive military expansion that led to World War II. It's a horrifying reminder of what can happen when you allow this kind of ideology to go unchecked.
Yeah, it's a dark chapter in human history, for sure.
Before we move on, I know we had a couple of other thinkers on our list here.
We do.
Figures whose ideas, maybe not, explicitly totalitarian, but their ideas have been kind of twisted to support these kinds of regimes.
Right. I mean, you could look at thinkers like Plato and Hobbes. Now, their ideas, they weren't totalitarian in themselves.
Okay.
But there are certain concepts, like Plato's idea of a philosopher king,
right,
a ruler guided by wisdom and reason, which sounds good on the surface.
Yeah.
Or you've got Hobbes' emphasis on this all-powerful sovereign to maintain order.
So they're taking these ideas and kind of twisting them to fit...
Taking them out of context.
In their own agenda.
Yeah, the cherry-picking to fit their own power grab. It's a reminder, I think, that even seemingly benign ideas can be weaponized by the wrong people.
Right. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the philosophical underpinnings of totalitarianism, but what does it actually look like to live in a totalitarian state?
I mean,
like, what are the hallmarks of life under a regime like that?
I think the best way to think about it is that every aspect of your life is controlled by the state, the government. So they're not just dictating what you do, but what you think, what you believe, even how you feel.
So in a society like that, there's no freedom of speech. There's no freedom of the press.
Nope.
There's no real freedom of thought.
All gone.
Because if you even think the wrong thing, they're going to come after you.
If you criticize the government, you're going to be punished.
So it's about creating an atmosphere of fear.
Absolutely.
Where people are afraid to even question the government.
They don't want any opposition. They can't have any cracks in the system.
And how do they maintain this kind of control over people?
Well, I mean, surveillance. That's a big one. You've got informants everywhere. Your neighbors could be reporting on phone calls tapped, that sort of thing.
So it's a very oppressive environment.
Very oppressive, yeah. And to justify all this, they often appeal to this idea of the collective good.
Right.
They say that individual rights have to be sacrificed for the greater good of the nation or the party or whatever they're calling themselves.
So they use this idea of the common good to justify these horrific acts.
Yeah, it's a way to manipulate people into accepting their own oppression.
And that's what makes totalitarianism so, I guess, insidious, is that it often starts with these really lofty promises.
Oh, yeah, of a better world.
But the reality is so much darker.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's what we're going to continue to explore in the next part of our deep dive. We'll look at the criticisms of these systems, how they fail economically, how they stifle creativity and innovation.
It's a fascinating, but it's a dark subject. But I think it's important to understand.
I think so, too. So we'll be back in a moment.
Welcome back to our deep dive into totalitarianism. Last time, we were talking about how, these utopian ideals, how they can be twisted and distorted and end up creating these regimes of, oppression and brutality.
It's a classic bait and switch, You promise paradise and you deliver hell on earth.
It's pretty scary to think about. And it's easy to think of totalitarianism as something that's, in the past, in the history books.
Right, yeah.
But I think, you've made it clear that the dangers we're talking about aren't just relics of the past.
Definitely not. I mean, totalitarianism can manifest in all sorts of ways, right? Sometimes it's not so obvious. It can be kind of subtle, almost disguised as solutions to complex problems. And that's actually what we need to be most worried about, I think.
Okay, so how do we spot these more subtle forms of totalitarianism? Well, I think one of the most obvious signs is when you start seeing free speech being eroded.
Okay.
Freedom of the press being clamped down on.
Right.
When people who disagree with the government or the mainstream narrative, whatever it is, when they're labeled as enemies of the people,
right,
or accused of spreading misinformation,
yeah,
that's a big red flag.
it's like that old saying, you know.
What is it?
The price of freedom is eternal vigilance.
That's it.
We can't afford to be complacent.
No, we can't. And another red flag is when you see certain groups being demonized. It could be based on ethnicity, religion, political views, whatever.
Right.
When you see people being scapegoated and like hatred and division being stoked up.
That's a classic.
That's a classic tactic, to consolidate power. And history is full of examples of how that can go wrong.
Yeah, I mean, think about, Nazi Germany.
Exactly. The demonization of the Jews.
Yeah, I mean, it's terrifying to see.
It is.
How easily hatred and prejudice can be manipulated.
Yeah. For these awful ends.
And it's not just about overt, hatred and discrimination.
Right.
It can be a lot more subtle than that.
Okay.
It can be about language, about how information is controlled, how fear and uncertainty are used to manipulate public opinion.
This is all starting to feel a little bit overwhelming.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff.
I mean, if these dangers are so insidious,
right,
so hard to spot, in the early stages,
yeah,
how do we even begin to resist them?
Well, it's not easy. There's no, magic formula. But I think there are things we can do, both as individuals and as a society.
Okay, so give us some practical steps we can take.
Well, one thing we can do is support independent media journalists.
Right.
I mean, they play such a vital role in holding power to account.
Right.
They provide a platform for different voices.
Yeah.
And they expose the truth, even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient for those in power.
I think we often take a free press for granted,
We do. It's only when it's under threat that we realize how important it is.
It's absolutely crucial to a healthy democracy.
Okay, what else?
Education. I mean, that's huge, right?
Yeah.
We need to understand history.
Right.
We need to be able to think critically about information.
Right.
To be able to separate fact from fiction, especially now in the age of social media.
Right. With all the misinformation out there.
That's overwhelming.
So it's about teaching ourselves and our kids how to question the narratives we're being fed.
To be skeptical, to demand evidence.
And to be aware of our own biases, our own susceptibility to propaganda and manipulation.
We're all vulnerable to it in different ways.
This is all pretty heavy stuff. I mean, it's easy to get caught up.
It is, yeah.
In the doom and gloom of it all.
Yeah.
Is there any reason for optimism?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, the dangers are real, for C. But so is the human spirit, right?
Okay.
We have this amazing capacity for resistance, for fighting for what's right. And that's what gives me hope.
So what can we do as individuals to tap into that spirit of resistance?
Well, we've talked about supporting independent media, promoting education, but there's also the power of just speaking out.
Okay.
Even small acts of resistance can make a difference.
So it's about finding those moments in our own lives to stand up for what we believe in, to support those who are being marginalized.
It could be having a tough conversation with a friend or family member who's saying something intolerant.
Right.
It could be supporting an organization that's fighting for human rights.
Yeah.
It could be attending a protest. There's so many ways to resist.
So even these small acts can contribute
absolutely.
to a broader culture of resistance against these totalitarian tendencies.
It's about creating a society where these ideologies are just not tolerated.
Right.
Where people feel empowered to speak truth to power.
Okay, so we've covered, the warning signs of totalitarian creep.
Right. We've talked about the importance of critical thinking, individual action.
And the moral dimension of this whole issue, which I think is really important.
Right. I wanted to go back to that because it's not just about politics and power, is it?
No, it's not. I mean, at its core, totalitarianism is a moral and ethical challenge.
Because these regimes, they demand that you sacrifice your own conscience,
exactly,
your own morality, in service to the state.
It's like they create this twisted moral universe where loyalty to the regime trumps everything else.
Right.
Truth becomes whatever the state says it is.
And compassion and empathy are seen as
weaknesses.
It's really
it's a perversion of values.
Yeah. It makes you wonder, what would I do if
Yeah.
I were in that situation?
Yeah, it's a tough question.
Would I have the courage
Yeah.
to stand up for what I believe in, even if it meant, losing everything?
It's a question we all have to ask ourselves. And it really underscores, I think, the moral and ethical challenges that we're talking about here.
It forces us to confront the darkest parts of human nature, both in those who have the power and those who are subject to it.
It's like that quote from Alexander Solzhenitsyn,
Oh, yeah.
the Russian writer.
The Gulag survivor.
Yeah. He said, the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being.
Wow, that's powerful.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, we're all capable of great good and great evil.
And the choices we make in those moments, they really define who we are. But it's not just about individual choices.
Right.
It's also about the kind of society we create.
Right.
The values we uphold. When we allow fear and hatred to take root, that's when these dangerous ideologies can really flourish.
So it's not just about fighting against specific regimes or ideologies. It's about creating a culture of empathy and compassion and respect for human dignity.
Exactly. It's about recognizing our shared humanity and understanding that the fight against totalitarianism is, at its core, a moral one.
It's about defending our fundamental right to think for ourselves.
To be free.
To believe what we want to believe.
Yes.
To live according to our own conscience.
That's what's at stake here.
Yeah.
And that's why this conversation is so important.
Welcome back. So we've really gone deep into some pretty dark territory.
Yeah, we have.
But it's important stuff to talk about.
Oh, absolutely.
To understand. And as we kind of wrap up this exploration, I'm curious, what are some of the key takeaways that you hope our listeners will walk away with?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway, and I know we've said this a few times already, but it's so important, is that totalitarianism isn't just something from the past.
Right.
It's not just a history lesson. It's still a threat. It's out there lurking in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to pop up again.
It's almost like a virus, It can mutate.
Right.
It can adapt. It can find new ways to infect societies.
That's a really good way to put it. And that actually leads to my second point, which is the importance of being vigilant. We need to be aware of the warning signs, the things we talked about earlier, like the erosion of freedoms, the demonization of certain groups, the glorification of the state or a single leader. Those are all red flags that we need to be paying attention to.
Yeah, it's like you said before, we can't afford to be complacent.
We can't.
We have to be active in safeguarding our freedoms.
Absolutely. And that brings me to my final point, which is the importance of individual action. It's easy to feel powerless, like there's nothing we can do in the face of these big systemic problems.
Right.
But that's just not true. Every single one of us has the power to make a difference.
So resisting totalitarianism isn't just about, these big political movements or revolutions.
No, it's about the choices we make every day.
Right.
It's about standing up for what we believe in.
Yeah.
Speaking out against injustice, supporting those who are being marginalized.
Right.
Promoting tolerance and understanding.
It's about recognizing that we all have a responsibility to protect democracy and human dignity.
And it's helpful, I think, to look at history.
Yeah.
There are so many inspiring examples of individuals and communities who stood up to these oppressive systems.
Right.
I mean, people who fought for their freedom, often against all odds, like Václav Havel, for example, in Czechoslovakia. His commitment to truth and justice, his unwavering belief in the power of the human spirit, it really helped to spark the Velvet Revolution.
Right.
And that led to the collapse of communist rule in his country.
It's amazing to think that one person's voice, one person's actions can have such a profound impact.
It can change the world. And let's not forget Nelson Mandela, who spent decades in prison for his fight against apartheid in South Africa, his commitment to nonviolence, his belief in forgiveness.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just incredible. And he helped to dismantle one of the most oppressive regimes in modern history.
His story really is a testament to the power of hope.
Absolutely.
And it shows us that even in the darkest of times, we can overcome these incredible challenges.
There are so many other examples, right? Ordinary people who did extraordinary things in the face of oppression. Their stories should give us all hope.
It's really inspiring.
It is.
And, you said it before, but it bears repeating. The fight against totalitarianism is, it's a moral fight.
It is.
It's about defending those fundamental values
Yeah.
that make us human. The freedom to think, to speak.
To believe, to live according to our own conscience.
Yeah.
Those are the things that are at stake here. And it's a fight that's worth having no matter what.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one message?
Oh, that's a tough one.
Yeah, it's a big one.
But I would say never underestimate the power of your own voice, your own actions.
Right.
And never give up hope.
Right.
Believe that a better world is possible.
Because, as Václav Havel said, hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense, regardless of how it turns out.
That's beautifully put. And I think it perfectly captures the spirit of this whole conversation. We have to keep fighting for what's right, even when it seems like all hope is lost. Because in the end, the fight itself is what gives our lives meaning. It's what makes us human.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. It's been a challenging conversation.
It has.
But I think an important one. And thanks to all of you for listening.